Before we begin, there may be variations in audio quality due to recording conditions. We appreciate your understanding and hope you enjoy the conversation. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Fender Gender. I'm Eyma, a trans man, filmmaker, and motorcycle lover, just out here figuring shit out like the rest of us.
And I'm Maxine, your friendly neighborhood trans girl, lover of motorcycles, and part-time agent of chaos.
We're two trans folks with big feelings and bigger opinions, riding through life and talking about the shit nobody else wants to say out loud.
Every week we unpack something real. Gender, grief, passing, panics, friendships, families, all of it.
This is not your clean-cut corporate podcast. It's just us, no filters, no rules, no binaries.
Let's get into it.
How's your morning going, LJ? How are you feeling today?
Oh, I hopped out of bed and got on the computer. But it's been good. It feels weird how it gets lighter earlier, or gets like the days are getting shorter. So it's a little strange for me waking up. But overall, it's been a peaceful morning.
LJ, would you like to introduce yourself to the viewers?
Yeah. I'm LJ. I'm a non-binary, transmasculine. I have been a poet, a writer, an educator for the past, I guess since I became an official adult at 18, so to speak. You can call yourself a career person now when that happens. So I've been doing that. I'm a performance poet. I've been across Vancouver and Victoria and Ontario doing my poetry. So that's both where I hail from, different province, Ontario as well as BC. So it's a little bit about me. I'm Chinese adoptee, so I situate in an interesting place in terms of my intersections when it comes to being multiple different sort of demographic backgrounds. So yeah, what about me?
Nice. That's amazing. You mentioned that you're non-binary and transmasculine. Actually, I have a question for you. So we had a guest on the show previously, and they asked me that question, and I would like to know what your perspective is around that. They asked me if I feel like there is a difference between transmasculine and being a trans man.
Yeah, I definitely think that it's individual to sort of labels like that are individual to personal preference is how I sort of feel. And I feel personally like transmasculine troubles a line between being not traditionally in a binary sort of transitional state, like trans man feels like one end of a spectrum, and transmasculine can fall anywhere between there and the non-binary sort of identity where you don't quite fit into either. And I feel like I strike right in between sort of a place where I stay in one identity position. I don't have fluidity, so I don't identify on the spectrum differently depending on the day. I just stay in that one place, and that is a trans masculine space, but I don't ever feel like a binary trans man. So yeah.
Yeah, I think I said something, like my answer was something along the lines that me personally, I always felt it's either I'm a woman or I'm the other thing. So I feel like I'm a trans man, but I don't think that transmasculine and trans men are the same thing, because you could still be non-binary and still feel transmasculine, or people would feel transmasculine but haven't done any medical transition or haven't even like social transition at all. They just feel like that. Yeah, so those were the differences that I raised during that conversation.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I think it makes sense. Yeah.
So when did you first start thinking about tea, and what did it mean for you personally?
I started thinking about tea when I was 16 or so. I went to a queer summer camp in Ontario for the first time when I was that age, 16, and I found that most of my cabin were trans masculine or trans men individuals, and I had never sort of encountered that particular identity demographic before, so I felt surprised and not aware of this was an option or a choice. And after I sort of got to know everybody in that cabin, I realized this is very distinctly an option and an ability. I have the ability to do this too. And then I started questioning whether I was really a cis woman. And I thought to myself, well, I've never felt like a girl, I've never felt like a boy. And I was using those labels from childhood, those sort of infant labels. And I thought that you had to be one or the other. And then transitioning sort of gave me the sense, like, or seeing other people transition rather, gave me the sense that this was not something that I had to pick and choose. And so I started thinking about being non-binary first, and then I started thinking about hormones after I realized being non-binary made me feel like I didn't quite fit in my body physically as a woman. So yeah.
And a follow-up question. I feel like a lot of people, when it comes to getting on T and seeing all of the changes that are happening to your body and stuff, and at some point you do start passing as a cis man. So how did you decide that you weren't a trans man, but you were more so non-binary?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I think I identified as non-binary first after that experience in the summer camp cabin with those trans masculine individuals. I sort of thought, yeah, I am non-binary, and I started using they them shortly after I left the camp with friends and people I felt comfortable with. And then I considered hormones a little later. And I mean, I guess it's interesting because even after starting hormones, I felt I did start passing as male, right? But I never really felt like a man ever. I've always felt exactly in between, or exactly on like a slightly farther masculine end of a spectrum than exactly non-binary. And I do picture it that way, whether or not it's more of a grid or whether it's maybe like a 3D cube. I don't really I have trouble visualizing, so in my head it lies as a line, and I lie somewhere farther on the masculine side of that line. Yeah.
And what's been unexpected throughout this journey for you?
It's been unexpected in the sense that I think I wasn't sure that my body would line up with what I imagined it would look like, or I wasn't sure whether I would identify or be comfortable with all the changes that took place on testosterone. I did start as quite a low dose of testosterone, and then I realized that it was something that I wanted to go up on. I wanted to feel like fully pass as male or whatever it was, and I didn't really, before I started testosterone, I didn't care about that, or I didn't think I was willing to go on T and quote unquote not pass as someone who felt like I was fully transitioned socially as well, in public and in the public eye. And then I decided, well, I don't care about that, but I do want to be on a higher dose. And that was interesting. And so I went on the full dose, and yeah, and it was unexpected because I wasn't sure if I would align mentally when I wanted the higher dose with how I felt physically, but I did find that I ended up pretty much aligning with what I expected I would look like. I have behind me I have self-portraits that I've done before I started testosterone, and what I imagined I would look like on T. And it's interesting because they almost exactly align with what I look like now, which is quite funny because I never really imagined that I could picture that image so clearly in my head and it would be accurate to that extent. So that was unexpected, sort of slipping into a part of myself that felt like it had been there all along, but hadn't really coalesced or reached its final form, so to speak. So that was really
Yeah.
unexpected.
Yeah, I can relate to that too. I feel like us trans people, we have this idea of what we would like to look like post transition or even while we are transitioning. And I feel like also, at least for me, it adds a little bit of pressure, especially when the results are not happening as fast as I would like. Like, well, am I ever gonna look like this? Should I stop testosterone? Is it working? But when I look at where I was 3 years ago, it's a completely different person. Even people who knew me before starting transition, like, oh, you look different. Even my mom pointed out, oh, the person that I knew 3 years ago is not the same person. It's not the same person who's standing in front of me right now. So when people make this type of remarks, I'm like, well, I guess it is working then.
Yeah, I definitely had a interesting time transitioning in regards to my parents as well. They didn't expect me to go on testosterone, I don't think. So that was interesting. And going through that and still identifying as non-binary, or the idea that I am not a trans man, I think it would have been easier for them to understand if I was said, oh, I'm a man. I had a friend still have a friend who was adopted from China just like me, and he and my family have been friends for our entire lives, like me and his entire lives. And he has this sense that he is a binary trans man. He uses he, him. He identifies completely as a man. And that's interesting to me because his family, I think, to some extent, grasped it and understood it a little better because of that binary transition. And my parents did sometimes in moments of high emotion say something like that, like, it would be easier if you were like him, it would be easier if you and I don't know if they ever said this out loud word for word, but it was sort of the sentiment behind a lot of their hesitancy. So that was interesting. And yeah, I think that growing up, they might have seen socially that I never had those cues or those sort of traditionally female mannerisms or whatever you would say that would fit into social stereotypes. I didn't play with dolls or whatever the stereotype is. I didn't like to dress up in dresses. I didn't like to do any of the things the other little girls were doing. I went to a princess party when I was 6 years old and I came as the big bad wolf. So, and my mother supported me in that.
The signs were there.
Yeah. She sewed the costume for me. She worked hard and sewed like a gray sweatsuit and a mask, and she let me, and she sewed for Annette from the Value Village, and I went and I terrorized those princesses. So
Wow. LJ, have you seen Howl's Moving Castle?
I have, yeah, when I was a lot younger.
Do you think do you know like Casper the fire?
Yes.
The fire's alive. Do you think Casper is transmasked?
I think Casper is transcoded. It feels like that for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I think my transition goal is the old woman version of Sophie, because she's very old, she's got big boobs, and she's very cynical and pessimistic.
I think that I was listening to the first podcast episode you sent me. I was thinking about how, Maxine, you were talking about, or both of you were talking about the idea that it's hard to live to see, it's not common to live to see trans elders. And I think that's a very interesting transition goal. Because it feels like, yeah, not just I want to look like this and represent this, but also I want to embody the idea that trans people can keep living, that they can grow old and they don't have to be hunted, so to speak.
Just has the grandma build. She's built for making soup, and That's my goal. That's my workout goal too.
Making soup? Yeah. I've been built to eat soup. Yeah.
I'll make soup and you can eat it. I made some beef stock recently. It's pretty good.
I did a chicken stock recently. Yeah.
Actually, last night we were talking about finding an older trans man and getting him on the show to ask what are the changes that he's seeing when he was younger to now. Does it feel the same? Because we're thinking cis men when they get to a certain age, they have lower testosterone. Some need Viagra. So I'm like, oh, what does it feel like? What's some trans men when they get to an older age? Like, does it slow down? Because we're still injecting T, I'm assuming. So
yeah, I wonder. I guess I wouldn't get menopause as a trans woman because the main use of estrogen as a drug is for cis women going through menopause, and they're like, oh no, I don't want to be moody and have my bones be brittle, so they take estrogen. But if I'm already taking estrogen, maybe that just won't happen to me.
It's an interesting thought because if you stay on the same dose of hormones that you have been on or are on according to your blood work or whatever, then you have the same level consistently. So the question is, I wonder whether your body would start to age and then just start using it less effectively, or whether you would stay on the same levels and then just have that be consistent so you wouldn't see as much sort of testosterone level degeneration as a cis man. Yeah. Something to think about, something I would never know about.
maybe we'll ask you again in 10, 20 years. Or reach out, hey, how old, Joe? Does it feel?
Yeah.
Be on the podcast.
Oh, the
Well,
podcast is gonna be big by then. We're gonna have 20 million subscribers.
Let's cross our fingers. How do you feel about non-binary people's experience with T and how they are often left out of mainstream trans narratives?
Yeah, I think that it's really interesting because it strikes a very fine line demographically that some people aren't familiar with who are both cis and who are both binary trans. So it's one of those right in between identities that a lot of people, I think, are unaware of as a possibility. And so I think it's becoming more common amongst trans folks. But something that I think is interesting is when I transitioned, I've always identified as a non-binary, but as soon as you start transitioning, people immediately place that trans label on you when you start medically transitioning. And when I first started T, I thought to myself, I really don't want to use the label trans at first. I thought, well, I'm non-binary. I just feel
I'm not
like
one of those trannies. Sorry.
I just thought I don't like need to use the label as a person who feels non-binary is what I thought. Then I realized as I transitioned, I would have to use the label socially, and it wasn't so much that I had an opposition to identifying as trans so much as I didn't feel the label fit internally at first. And to some extent, I wonder whether even like if society was more accepting, or if, whatever hypothetical, whether I would identify as trans, or whether I prefer, honestly, in an ideal world, to just identify as myself and not feel the need to label non-binary, trans, queer, if all these terms weren't used to isolate or sort of differentiate and other people. I think that they could be useful in the sense that you can understand yourself better in relation to your own identity in relation to others through these terms. But I really think that, and I've gone a bit off track here, but that the micro community, like dividing everyone up into these little categories, can really sort of bring people farther apart rather than bring them closer together. So I do think that non-binary people's experiences are, especially when you're on T, are often left out of mainstream trans narratives. But I think it doesn't have to be. I hope that we can all understand we're under this umbrella, or that we're under this similar sort of demographic, and hope that people don't that, you know, you straddle a line, but hopefully you could be accepted into either community and you're not isolated from both, if that makes sense. And it's something that I think needs to happen more, especially with the rising sort of right-wing narratives all throughout the world for people who are queer to start accepting different parts of other demographics more than they isolate from each other, because I think we're going to need every person we can get in the trans army. when we go to the end of the world, we fight against all the cis people in one great battle.
I don't know if you feel the same way, but a lot of people feel like non-binary people are not on the trans spectrum. It's as if they are separate. But I feel like, in my opinion, if you were assigned a specific gender at birth and you transition either like man, woman, non-binary, it's still like some sort of like transition that is happening there. But I'm not sure if you feel the same way.
I feel like it's very complex because a lot of people, I think, only accept you as trans if you medically transition, and that's a whole other thing to get into. But I think that non-binary troubles a line that people are often very uncomfortable addressing because you don't necessarily medically transition if you're non-binary, and then you can be considered othered, or you're not trans but because you didn't transition if you're non-binary, or you're not trans enough. You know, there's lots of stereotypes like that which are very harmful, but also I think very interesting that, you know, that's how it's viewed and portrayed. I do think that if I didn't medically transition, people would just still see me as a woman or as a non-binary person, but like, and the people who are less accepting would go, you're like she, her, you know, and that would be, I think, too upsetting for me, which is, I think, why I initially decided to medically transition. I thought I would rather be socially, or not even socially, but it's a necessity for me to feel comfortable in my body to medically transition, and the social repercussions of such, in the sense that I wouldn't be accepted into women's spaces, was something that I felt I had to give up in a way that felt very like a loss. But I also felt like to feel comfortable in my body and to do this, so that was a very sort of interesting thing to weigh in my head.
And I don't think that you have to medically transition or like socially transition to identify as trans. It's all bullshit.
I feel like when we make generalizations, the discourse ends up getting stupid and pointless, because there are people who don't medically transition who identify just as one gender or the other, like, oh, I'm a trans woman or I'm a trans man, and maybe you don't have access to hormones, or maybe you don't want them. And then there's also non-binary people like yourself who do medically transition. And I feel like a lot of times the online discourse is so stupid because people throw these words around, like they're like, oh, like they say like non-binary, but they mean, like, they also allude that they mean someone who's not medically transitioning, but like that's not the case for a lot of non-binary people. And there are a lot of like trans girls who aren't on the hormones.
There's a lot of, I think, gender is a much wider spectrum than I think can be possibly understood, especially by, you know, certain folks who identify very strongly in their, or very comfortable with their gender identity, who are cis, and who just sort of think, well, I can't imagine being anything different. And I think that's the case in a lot of these social issues, is the idea that you can't quite bridge that gap of understanding because you feel so different from the other person that you're looking at or that you're interacting with. You feel like, well, I could never understand where you're coming from. I mean, it's interesting because I think you don't necessarily have to understand. You just have to accept, if that makes sense. You don't have to sort of go and really parse in your head and like wrap your head around it. You can just go, okay, I accept that that's who you are. That's the way it is. And yeah, it's not as hard as I think they make it out to be.
Because as trans people, we're literally not bothering anyone.
I'm being the menace, but
I mean, violent.
they should just come at me and ignore the other.
Yeah, it's really not that hard to just accept someone as who they are. So what? It doesn't fit your narrative of what normal is. It's like, all breathing the same air. I'm not taking that away from you. So what's the big deal? We'll just be like, oh, somebody's trans, then okay, that's it. Like, who cares?
Yeah, I think that leads into your we already answered one of those other questions that you had asked, and it leads into the last one, I think, quite well. Yeah, that's funny.
Oh yeah, last question to wrap up since we're coming up on time. If someone
Yes.
listening is thinking about tea but feels they don't fit the traditional mold, what's one thing you'd want them to hear?
I have a number of friends who are considering testosterone who have come to me for insight or advice because they don't feel like they fit one way or another way and they're on the fence about it. And I would tell them, you know, I was on the fence too about starting testosterone. When I started it, I really knew I wanted it, but it was interesting because all these parts of myself that I felt didn't quite fit, I didn't necessarily understand why they didn't fit, and I didn't necessarily label testosterone as the answer, but I thought to myself, I don't like the way my hips look in the mirror, and I don't like the way my voice sounds. I don't like the way my chest feels, and that in hindsight is definitely dysphoria. But initially I thought, oh, I just have, maybe it's just body dysmorphia. Maybe I just feel like if I thought to myself at the time I had an eating disorder, and I was like, oh, if I'm I thought to myself, well, I'm overweight or whatever stereotype I was thinking in my head, you know. And then I thought, maybe if I lose this weight, then I'll feel less like I need to transition. And I think I would tell them it's really depend on yourself as an individual, but often those signs are masked by other factors in your life that are calling for your attention more strongly perhaps than the transition is. And I think it's important to understand where you're situated in relation to the rest of your life and transition accordingly, so to speak. So think to yourself, well, what are these other moving parts? And transition it looked to me very different than it looked to a lot of other people. It looked very different for me than I expected it to look. So I thought to myself, maybe all these signs aren't related to transition. And sometimes I wonder still if testosterone just happened to fix those aspects of myself I wasn't comfortable with and wasn't even related to gender. But I do think it was in the end. Sometimes I still hesitate. So it's interesting, right? And it looks different for everybody. And I think that I like them sort of just, you have to know yourself to know whether you want to transition. And that's something that is a journey that everyone will be exploring for the rest of their lives in their own individual way.
That's it for this episode of Fender Gender. Thank you for being here with us as we build the space one convo at a time.
If this episode resonated with you, we want to hear it. You can stay anonymous. We've got a submission link in the episode notes.
And if you want to support Fender Gender and help us keep the mics rolling, head over to our Patreon. Every bit helps. We eventually have some bonus content coming your way. Links in the description.
Our next episode will be part 2 of LJ's interview. Stay tuned in 2 weeks.
Subscribe, rate us, and tell your messy queer cousin to listen.
We'll see you next time.